December 3rd, 1984, 1 o'clock in the morning. Bhopal, India. A plume of gas begins rising from the Union Carbide pesticide plant on the northern edge of the city. It is invisible. It has no color. In the right concentration, it is not immediately detectable by smell. But where it passes over human bodies, it destroys tissue in the eyes, lungs, and airways. At the cellular level, within the first hour, people die in their beds. Animals die on the streets. Birds fall from the trees. By morning, the hospitals are overwhelmed. The bodies in the streets are so numerous that city workers load them into trucks with the same equipment used for municipal waste. In the days that follow, estimates of the dead range from 2,000 to 8,000 for the first 72 hours alone, with tens of thousands more dying from gas-related illness over the following months and years. The total death toll from the Bhopal gas disaster, depending on how you count the long-term illness casualties, is somewhere between 15,000 and 25,000 people. Warren Anderson, CEO of Union Carbide, flew to Bhopal to assess the situation. He was detained briefly by Indian authorities. He was then allowed to leave the country. He never returned. He died at his home in Florida in 2014, at age 92, having never faced criminal trial in India for what happened at his company's plant. Union Carbide India Limited was established in 1934. By the 1970s, it operated the Bhopal plant as a means of meeting India's growing demand for agricultural pesticides. Part of the Green Revolution that was transforming Indian agriculture. The Bhopal plant initially imported the active ingredients it needed and formulated them locally. In the 1970s, the plant was expanded and upgraded to manufacture MIC on site, which increased the plant's efficiency and reduced costs significantly. The decision to store large quantities of MIC in underground tanks, rather than manufacturing it in small batches and using it immediately in production, was economically rational. Storage allowed production to run continuously without the supply chain vulnerabilities of just-in-time manufacturing. But it created a stockpile of one of the most toxic industrial chemicals in widespread use, sitting in a densely populated urban area, in a facility whose safety systems were progressively degraded through a period of reduced production and cost-cutting. The gas that escaped from Plant 610 of the Union Carbide India facility that night was methyl isocyanate, MIC. It is one of the most toxic industrial chemicals in common use. A single drop on human skin causes severe blistering. Inhaled at sufficient concentration, it reacts with moisture in the airways to form carbamic acid, destroying lung tissue faster than the body's defense mechanisms can respond. The Bhopal plant used MIC as an intermediate in the manufacture of Sevin, a widely used agricultural pesticide. The decision to store MIC in large quantities on site rather than manufacturing it in smaller batches as needed was a cost and efficiency calculation. The Bhopal plant stored MIC in 3 large underground tanks that together held approximately 60 tons of the chemical. Tank 610 alone held approximately 40 tons on the night of the disaster. Tank 610 had been in a compromised state for months. Its refrigeration unit, which kept the MIC cool and reduced pressure in the tank, had been shut down in June 1984 and had not been repaired. The plant's management had determined that keeping the MIC refrigerated while the plant was operating at reduced capacity was not cost-effective. They had also decommissioned the scrubber system designed to neutralize any MIC that might escape from the tanks before it reached the atmosphere, and the flare tower, a last resort system to burn off any escaping gas, was undergoing repairs and was not functional. Of 3 separate safety systems designed to prevent exactly the kind of release that occurred on the night of December 2nd and 3rd, Not one was operational. A 1982 safety audit conducted by a Union Carbide team from the United States had found 15 significant hazards at the Bhopal plant, 12 of them classified as high danger. The report specifically flagged the MIC storage area. The report was received by Union Carbide India management. Some recommendations were implemented. The refrigeration unit failure, which would come 6 months after the safety audit, was not anticipated. The human cost of the Bhopal disaster extended far beyond the immediate deaths. In the weeks following the initial release, hundreds of thousands of people sought medical treatment for symptoms that included severe respiratory distress, eye damage, gastrointestinal problems, and neurological effects. The local medical infrastructure in Bhopal, already serving a large, economically disadvantaged population, was completely overwhelmed. Union Carbide provided limited immediate medical assistance and disputed aspects of the clinical guidance offered to Indian doctors about treatment of MIC exposure, partly because acknowledging the specific toxicological characteristics of MIC in detail would have been damaging in the litigation that the company correctly anticipated. What triggered the disaster itself remains, to this day, formally contested. The most widely accepted technical explanation is that water entered tank 610, triggering a runaway exothermic reaction that rapidly raised the temperature and pressure inside the tank beyond the point the safety systems could have controlled, even if they had been functioning. The water may have entered through a routine pipe washing operation conducted earlier that evening, in which a worker failed to install a safety disc that would have prevented water from reaching the tank. Union Carbide's own narrative insisted for years that the water introduction was deliberate, sabotaged by a disgruntled employee. Indian investigators never found evidence supporting this theory. Independent technical reviews consistently found the evidence consistent with accidental water intrusion during maintenance. The sabotage theory, however, was legally useful. If deliberate sabotage caused the disaster, the corporation's liability was substantially reduced compared to a finding of systemic safety negligence. By 10 o'clock on the night of December 2nd, workers at the plant had detected that something was wrong with tank 610. Pressure readings were elevated. Within an hour, the situation was clearly dangerous. The plant superintendent decided not to trigger the public emergency alarm system because he did not want to cause panic. The alarm was finally activated at around 1 in the morning, but the public warning system for the surrounding neighborhoods was inadequate for the task of evacuating hundreds of thousands of people in the middle of the night. The neighborhoods closest to the plant were among the poorest in Bhopal. The families who lived there were predominantly slum dwellers, migrants from rural areas who had settled near the plant for economic opportunity. They had no cars, no phones, no warning systems, except whatever they could hear or see. When the gas arrived, those who ran away from it survived. Those who did not know which direction to run, or who tried to run toward the plant, thinking the fog was a fire they could help control, often died. The legal and diplomatic history of the effort to bring Anderson to justice in India is one of the longest-running episodes in international corporate accountability. Indian courts issued summons that were repeatedly ignored or evaded. The United States government received formal extradition requests and declined each, one on various procedural and legal grounds, including, at various times, arguments about treaty scope, arguments about the political nature of the request, and arguments about the sufficiency of evidence under the relevant treaty standards. Anderson's location was, at different periods, described differently by different parties. The Indian government at one point could not locate him. Journalists who investigated found him at various times in Connecticut and Florida, a private citizen living in apparent comfort, untouched by the legal apparatus of any country. When Indian newspapers published his address in the 2000s, there was briefly renewed international attention to the extradition question. It produced no change in his status. Warren Anderson arrived in Bhopal within 2 days of the disaster. He was arrested by Indian police. He was released on bail within hours, having posted a relatively small bond, on condition that he return to face charges. He boarded a Union Carbide company plane and left India. He never returned. Indian courts issued multiple warrants for his arrest. The United States repeatedly declined India's extradition requests, citing various procedural objections. Anderson retired from Union Carbide in 1986. He moved through a series of residences in the United States. Over the following decades, his location at various points disputed or obscured. When he died in September 2014 in Vero Beach, Florida, the timing received relatively little international media attention, partly because it came in the same month as a major climate summit and other competing news events. The Bhopal plant site, which Union Carbide eventually sold to Dow Chemical in 1999, has never been fully remediated. Groundwater monitoring in the area surrounding the site has shown persistent contamination with a range of toxic compounds for decades after the disaster. The families of the dead and the survivors and their children, exposed to chemicals both during the disaster and through contaminated groundwater in the years since, have been the subjects of numerous medical and epidemiological studies, several showing elevated rates of cancer, birth defects, and reproductive abnormalities compared to control populations. The compensation paid to Bhopal victims following a 1989 settlement between the Indian government and Union Carbide totaled approximately $470 million, divided among roughly 500,000 claimants. The average payment per person was less than $1,000. The Indian government had initially sought $3 billion. The settlement included provisions that discharged Union Carbide from all future civil and criminal liability related to the disaster in India. Many survivors considered this the second catastrophe visited upon them by the same company. The Indian government's acceptance of the Union Carbide settlement in 1989, the $470 million, was made over the objection of many survivors and advocacy groups who argued the amount was grossly inadequate. The settlement was negotiated under the government's legal theory that it had the right to represent all Bhopal victims as a class, a theory that Indian courts ultimately accepted. Individual survivors had limited ability to opt out or pursue separate claims. The settlement funds, distributed through a bureaucratic process that many survivors described as difficult, slow, and opaque, arrived years after the disaster and amounted in practice to amounts that did not come close to reflecting the healthcare costs, lost earning capacity, and ongoing suffering of the people affected. The Bhopal site today remains one of the most vivid illustrations of what economists call externalized costs, the consequences of an industrial operation borne by people who had no role in the decisions that caused them, and no means of compelling those responsible to bear the costs themselves. Dow Chemical, which acquired Union Carbide in 1999 and thereby acquired its assets, has consistently maintained that it has no legal responsibility for liabilities that arose before the acquisition. Indian courts have disagreed. The matter has not been resolved to the satisfaction of Bhopal's residents, the Indian government, or international observers who have followed the litigation. The groundwater beneath the former plant site shows contamination at levels substantially above safe drinking water standards. The families who live in the neighborhoods around the site, who are predominantly poor, who have few other housing options, and who rely on water sources that include groundwater from the contaminated area, have been the subjects of multiple epidemiological studies. Those studies have found elevated rates of cancer, chromosomal abnormalities, and birth defects compared to control populations. The children and grandchildren of the night of December 2nd and 3rd, 1984, are living in the health consequences of that night in ways that no compensation has addressed. Warren Anderson died in his Vero Beach home in September 2014. His death was not widely reported. The New York Times ran a brief obituary. The statement released by Union Carbide said that the company extended its deepest sympathies to all those affected by the tragedy. It did not use the word accident. It did not use the phrase, "we were responsible." It expressed sympathy the way corporations express sympathy when their lawyers have reviewed the language very carefully. In Bhopal, on the night Anderson died, some of the survivors gathered near the former plant site. They burned an effigy. It was the only accountability they had ever received. If you want to understand the disasters where 25,000 people died, the CEO went home and the corporation paid less than $1,000 per life, subscribe. Every week, a story that was hidden in plain sight